Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Interjections. Today on the podcast, we recap the romp of Fiorentina, provide you with a full breakdown of the summer Mercato, including some grades, and we interview Thomas, the man behind the Xtra Twitter accounts. Thanks for listening. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Interjections. I'm your host, Andrew. I have Miko, Irfan, and Jay with me here. We have a busy episode where we have our first ever podcast guest coming up. We're going to do a comprehensive recap of the Mercato. Now, I know you all want a Milan preview episode, and we're going to give it to you. But rather than trying to get it into this already jam-packed agenda, we're going to have a special mini episode previewing the Derby. So you can look forward to that dropping in the middle of this week. I actually want to start by talking about the just domination of Fiorentina from last weekend. It was a comprehensive win. The fixture was never in doubt. From the first half on, I was really happy with how everyone played. Maybe I want to start by talking particularly about Thuram, who opened the scoring. He also had an assist. He also won a penalty. He also missed a few easy chances. He easily could have been on a hat trick. Irfan, what do you think of Thuram last game?
Great. He did a great job. Like you mentioned, he was involved in some really big plays. He got his first goal, which I think puts a lot of people's worries to rest. But then, a little bit of a mixed bag. He did miss some good chances. His pass to Lautaro for Lautaro's goal was really good. I think he's kind of blossoming into the role. You could see his confidence increasing. I thought Inter generally were really good, but Fiorentina were really, really bad in defense, especially. But I think Thuram kept them under pressure quite a bit. And overall, we looked in cruise control. We looked just, very confident, very cohesive. And like you mentioned, it was just a comprehensive win. And Thuram, I think, was a big part of that. He just does so much stuff to help unlock Lautaro. And I think, the way I view it is for the longest time, we kept looking for, Batman to become, so Lautaro could be the right kind of Robin for Batman. And it really feels like Thuram is unlocking Lautaro's Batman potential by being such a good Robin. So, I think more than even Thuram, it's the effect Thuram has on Lautaro. But even in and of itself, I thought Thuram had a great match against Fiorentina.
I do worry the missed chances highlight some of our concerns with the player in that he did not come through the ranks as a natural number 9. He was a winger who has kind of been converted to this new role in recent years. And his finishing, his positioning is still a little raw as a result of this late career transition. But the good thing is he's not being counted on to be the number 1 goal scorer on the team. And overall, he's having a really positive impact on the style of play, I think.
Yeah, I think that at least I don't expect Thuram to score a lot. So those kind of misses or something, I just think that, okay, they will happen, they will come anyway. And they are like, for instance, if Lukaku does such misses, and he did those last season, apart from the Champions League final, also in the season, he messed up few empty netters. And those are something which are less forgivable for Lukaku than for Thuram, because as you said, he's not like a striker. He's not the finisher naturally.
He gets paid 50% more than Thuram as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Did you guys have any thoughts on the substitutions? I was maybe a little surprised that Asllani got some minutes at the end of the fixture, replacing Hakan. We talked about last episode of what's going on in the midfield. Do you think Asllani is actually the true deputy for Hakan?
it looks to be the case. I think Inzaghi's kind of accepting the fact that Asllani's here to stay, and so he has to get some use out of him. So thankfully, he's going to start featuring him a bit more, give him some minutes, and hopefully blood him into the role because the Mercato is closed. We're not going to get that alternative anymore. This is what he's got to work with, so he's got to make it work.
As long as he has a 3-goal lead or more, maybe. Yeah. Otherwise, I fully expect Hakan to play, 90 minutes each match. And everyone knows I'm a unapologetic Asllani supporter, and yet still, I just, it was refreshing to see him get some minutes. But especially given the depth we have at midfield, I suspect, absent some very big leads, we're probably not going to see too much of Asllani, but that's okay. It was good to see him at least in this match.
The rest of the subs, I think those were exactly the same as the first 2 matches and almost like the same minutes. But that's the Inzaghi
So I had one
specialty.
I had one quick question going back to the Thuram. I know he scored for France as well just recently.
Yeah, first goal.
Yeah, but I didn't see kind of what position they play him in and what their setup is. So how is he, I guess, deployed in France? Because, if he gets some minutes with the French team, that's just more reps for him in a forward position where he gets more practice.
Yeah. Giroud was starting as a lone center forward, I think, and then he got injured, so Thuram replaced him. So he was the lone forward there. So he got some chances there. He messed up one easy header.
Right at the end.
It looked like Lukaku there.
Yeah, it was all part of the bigger Milan conspiracy for them to keep Giroud well rested while tiring out Inter's players ahead of the derby next week.
Yeah, with apparently Hernandez and Maignan both returning early for some unspecified reason.
Yeah,
some fake injuries.
France play with they had Dembele and Mbappe on the wings and Griezmann as like some kind of AM/SS hybrid, So they essentially have 4 strikers on the pitch. So I think that really helps someone like Thuram to play that number 9 role. Whereas if you had maybe more traditional wingers like, going back to Spalletti days, if you had like Candreva and Perisic, he would struggle a bit more. But I think just like at Inter, having some out-and-out strikers around him really helps Thuram play in that centre-forward role. So that's only good for us if he can continue to get minutes in that kind of setup for France and obviously at Inter as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things I think Thuram probably deserves a little bit more credit for is one of the main criticisms I always had of Dzeko and Lukaku, which is, they might be pure center forwards in the sense that, they play in the box and they're good at hold-up play. They're good at bringing the ball down. But a lot of times they would bring the ball down and then their distribution was just so bad. Like that with Dzeko, I always felt like he probably massacred like 60 to 70% of our attacks because he might bring the ball down, but then his outlet pass to either the winger or to the other forward was so poor. And I think Thuram has a really good touch on the ball, and I'm not surprised that we're seeing the, I guess just the velocity and the amount of attacking play so much better so far this year. I know a lot of that has to do with the defenses we've played, but I also feel that Thuram just helps the amount of attacks that we have in any given match be more threatening.
Completely agree. It's a good looking attack, and I just found it interesting. It was kind of counterattack based. We took the initiative, got the early goal, which was kind of on a bit of a breakaway with DiMarco crossing it in. And then after that, Fiorentina dominated possession in the game. Inter actually had the 3rd or 4th worst possession percentage in all of the league that match week. Fiorentina had the ball, but we were just getting out and running at them. And you saw it on the Thuram assist. You saw it on the DiMarco assist, just kind of having open space and making a killer pass in for a goal scoring chance.
Yeah, we spoke about this a little bit last week with I kind of expressed concerns about how many times we lost the ball in transition against Cagliari, but I think we did a lot better against Fiorentina. And it did help, as Irfan said, that Fiorentina looked unfit almost. I think they played midweek in the Conference League, and maybe that contributed to it, but we were a lot better on the counter. We tore them apart. They were really slow in covering spaces, and we were able to dominate that. If you guys remember, there was a lot of talk about a part of the reason we decided to let Brozovic go was to transition to a more rapid counter-attacking system rather than having so much time on the ball, especially in that regista position with Hakan replacing Brozovic. And I think we're seeing that Hakan is a lot more direct in passing than Brozovic. And then when we sit deep and play more on the counter, I think we're seeing the I think we're seeing the machinations of that take effect right now.
Yeah, was it the second goal, the first Lautaro goal? That was a great attack from. And I think it started like pretty deep from our half. And the first goal, that was like a counter press?
DiMarco or Bastoni put in a cross, and Lautaro missed like a really, well, he should have scored the header, to be honest, but it hit the goalkeeper, hit the post, and then Fiorentina had a counter-attack that went all the way up to our goal. We won it back and then counter-attacked again, and then that's when Lautaro scored.
Yeah, the stats were actually the possession stats, what Andrew was mentioning. It was like 40-60 to Fiorentina, but it was funny to when looking at the match, we were like in total control of the match. Like for the whole match, there was like no problems at any point, even without the ball, because we have the without the ball we can still control it pretty well, because we just couldn't let them go anywhere in our half.
Yeah, they didn't play some of their better players too, right? I mean, I know on defense, my boy Martinez Cuarta didn't play. But it seemed like they definitely struggled with that midweek fixture and not looking their best. Because I still expect some decent things from Fiorentina this year, but they definitely didn't show it against us.
Yeah, it didn't help that they lost Amrabat as well right before the game, I guess.
The only part of the game I was perhaps disappointed by was Pavard, and to a lesser extent Klaassen, didn't get any minutes. Well, was hoping for a debut. It's a 4-0 game, good opportunity before the derby to get them some minutes so they have an appearance with us. I would assume, we'll dive into this on the Milan preview, I would assume this means Darmian's 100% starting against Milan, and you're going to have to ease Pavard into things off the bench. He did play for France a couple days ago, but it was a 2-minute cameo off the bench.
Yeah, I was just checking that it was 3-0 when Inzaghi made those 3 substitutions, Cuadrado, Augusto, and Arnautovic in. So then he had only one sub left, and that was Aslani. But it could have been nice to see Pavard get some minutes.
Or Klaassen.
Well, okay.
I'm just kidding. All right.
Are we all just gonna ignore that wonderful assist from Cuadrado? I mean, we're not even gonna mention it. Come on, guys. What is this?
Cuadrado is not an Inter player in my books. Just anything. Once he inevitably gives away a penalty against Juve that gives them a 2-1 win, we can talk about Cuadrado. Until then.
But it was a great assist, but I think the finish was even better. That was very cool stuff by Lautaro.
That's the kind of thing that we can happily benefit from when it comes to Cuadrado. Dumfries doesn't have either the technical ability nor the kind of creativity to even try something like that for the most part. Dumfries is very what's the word I'm looking for here? Is very lateral. Yeah, he's like playing on PlayStation with the D-pad only back in the early 2000s. You know what I mean? He only goes in 4 directions. Whereas Cuadrado has a lot more fluidity to the way he plays, and against the tight opponent, he can use his pace and that creativity to hurt them even more. So I have to say, reluctantly, he's going to prove to be a useful acquisition.
Yeah, I'm not willing to go that far yet. I have concerns, but we'll see. He hasn't been asked to play any real defense yet, which is
that is true.
Run into. All right, everyone. I'm happy to have our first ever guest in the history of the Interjections podcast. With us today, we have the man behind Inter Xtra, Thomas. Thomas, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your time here. So first off, Inter Xtra, it's a great Twitter account. I think most people who are English speaking Inter fans are following your account, and it's just a great community hub. So just want to first off say awesome job. So glad we have you around aggregating news for everyone.
Thanks. Yeah, it's tough, but it's fun. I really enjoy it.
So maybe before we get into the details behind how you run the account, just would be curious to know more about yourself, where you're from, how you became an Inter fan, how long you've been an Inter fan for, and I don't know, maybe your favorite player or something.
Yeah, so I'm 22 years old. I'm from just outside of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. Yeah, I started supporting the club. My mother's family is from Italy, and basically her dad came over to Canada when he was a teenager. I don't know exactly how he started supporting Inter because he's from, I think the closest major city to where he's from is Florence, so not super close to Milan or anything like that. But yeah, all in all, he's an Inter fan. My older cousins too, I guess he got them into supporting it. So basically, when I was younger and I would go over to his house, he would just have games on, stuff like that, or every so often, like they would just be talking about the team. And since I was younger, I was a young kid, I didn't really have a favorite team or anything like that. So I was like, okay, I'll just, I was like, I'm Italian. I feel obligated to like an Italian team, and these guys are always talking about Inter, so kind of stuck with it. Started watching games, and yeah, here we are.
And it's impressive you kind of stuck with it, because being 22, like you said, when you were coming up, you're probably 10 years old maybe when we won the Champions League, won the treble.
Yeah.
You've seen a lot of bad football in your life, so how have you managed to hang on this long and see the glory days through?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it wasn't great when I was born in like the banter era of Inter, and there were times where I wasn't like watching games like week in and week out, and I've never actually traveled to Milan. I've been to Italy, but not to Milano, like or watched the game or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was more of like, when I first started, I was more like a casual fan. And then kind of as we slowly started to get better, making Champions League, stuff like that. Even before that, then it was like, okay, like I'm going to watch these guys week in, week out because they're serious and it's just getting better and easier to watch, I guess.
Yeah, the style of football has definitely become a little bit more attractive and fun to watch in the past 5 years too.
Oh, yeah. It's like night and day, yeah.
So who's your favorite Inter player since you started watching the club?
I mean, since he signed, it's always been Nicolo Barella. I don't know. I always have like an attraction towards like the midfielders. I always like, I'm a fan of them always. So yeah, I guess my favorite player has been Barella.
Okay. I mean, there's not really a wrong answer unless you drop like an Adair claim on me or something like that.
What I mean? Yeah, that'd be questionable.
So curious to learn more about how you started Inter Xtra. So I think it's a newer account. It looks like on your Twitter page is from 2020, so maybe the middle of the pandemic. But how you started the account, what inspired you, and how you've kind of grown it this far to the point where you're actually followed by the official Inter account and you're followed by our favorite tap-in merchant, Romano.
Jeez. Yeah, I don't know. Like when since probably for like the past several years. I've always been into like kind of doing the graphic design and Photoshop and different things like that. Like when I was really young, I used to do it for like FIFA, the Ultimate Team, like cards and stuff like that. And so it kind of just progressed to Twitter when I made an account years ago, and I would do like the jersey swaps or whatever. I remember my first one, I think that really got some likes, was Lukaku when he signed for Inter in 2019 or whatever it was. That was when it first got like 200 likes. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy. And so I've always kind of been interested in like the digital media world in sport. Like I went to school for sport business. And so I would see these accounts that were generally like the Premier League or like the Real Madrid or like these huge clubs, and they would have these accounts. I think the one that has most stood out to me has been the City Xtra account for Manchester City. Like they're one that I follow them, even though, I don't really care too much about Manchester City, but I just like the way they do things. And I like how they cover the club and how they've grown and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, well, there's not really an account exactly like that for Inter, for the English speaking fans, because there's a lot of us on Twitter. So one day, yeah, it was like 2020 or 2021. I made an account. I was like, I didn't really know where to start. Cause like, how do you just start tweeting random news stuff. So I was like, okay, I'll just make an account, go on Gazzetta dello Sport or stuff like that, and just kind of like report different whatever, kind of follow the same layout as some of these other Twitter accounts do that. And so yeah, it's just kind of plugging away at it for the past 2-3-ish years, and it's been managed to grow, pretty big. And so I'm pretty happy with how far it's come.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible when you think about you've really become an English news hub for all of our fans, and it's a widely followed club worldwide, and English is kind of the language of the world, and it doesn't matter which kind of interplace I go, whether it be the forum, Reddit, other accounts on Twitter, it's somehow your account is being retweeted there. So it's just massive growth the past few years.
Yeah, the Champions League final especially is like I was getting like 1,000 followers like every 2 weeks or something. Like it was insane how much it really goes to show, like just the team doing well, just like it's obvious, but as the team just does well and cements themselves in Europe and stuff like that, it's easier for it to grow and stuff like that. And so yeah, it's been really good.
So what does your process look like? Obviously, news can come from all sorts of places. You have your reliable people like Romano or Padula. Then sometimes I see you linking to more obscure sources, like through the Pavar saga, you had some German accounts you were citing and sourcing. So what does a day look like for you when you're trying to like consolidate this news and evaluate whether or not you're going to put something out there for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the more concrete ones, the Fabrizio Romano, all those guys, like they're easy, they'll tweet, okay, right away, make a tweet. He's tier 1, pretty like most of the time, pretty reliable. But then yeah, for these other kind of like foreign ones who I'm not super familiar with, if I see fan accounts of these other news accounts of like the other teams related to them, and they're putting them out, and they seem like they're creditable, then okay, I'll look into the kind of the account or the source they've linked, find out, okay, is this person just like a independent journalist, or if they're working for a site or something like that. Okay, if I think it's reliable, then I'll put it out, because not everything that comes out in, say, when we were signing Pavard, not everything that comes out in the German media also comes out in the Italian media. So it's easy kind of to gauge whether it's needed to be put out or stuff like that. Like not all the details kind of come out the same in different media, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I see your little moon system you have going on, which I think is common on a few places on Twitter, but it's a good barometer for measuring like how much we should trust something when you put it out there.
Yeah, sometimes I don't add it for the foreign sources that I'm not like super familiar with, or I'll just leave it. And if it's like I'm not 100% sure myself every time.
So if there is like an obscure news report that comes out of like Chile about Alexis Sanchez, how do you find something like that? How does that come across your desk to the point where you're evaluating it?
A lot of the times, honestly, it's just scrolling on Twitter. Like you can have these lists where you just compile all the big journalists or any page you want to follow, and only that will come onto your timeline. So yeah, a lot of the time it's just getting tweeted or like the recommended for you timeline, there's two on Twitter where it's like followed or for you. So a lot of the times the for you is really helpful as well. If I'm not exactly following them, then I'll see a name or something that stands out in one of those tweets, and I'll look into it a bit more. Then there's also the pages, FC Inter 1908 or FC Inter News. Those two sites, they also find a lot of stuff. So a lot of the times I'll do source and then via one of those two sites, since if that's where I find it from.
That makes sense. Although I try to stay away from the For You tab, because occasionally the algorithm says, hey, this guy likes Calcio, let's send him tweets about Juventus or Milan. And it'll be Milan fan account saying, Thuram sucks, or wow, Summer can't save the ball, and it's just, infuriates me.
Yeah, that's true. I know there's a lot of questionable stuff on there too, but every so often you get a gem.
Every once in a while. So what are your thoughts on Inter's Mercato this summer? It's been a whirlwind. We've seen a lot of the old guard leave, several new arrivals, big name acquisitions like Thuram and Pavard, also some just solid, hopefully, bench players like Klaassen or Bisek, Augusto. What are your thoughts overall? How do you think the summer transpired? Are you happy with what the team looks like right now?
I think this whole kind of transition turnover period was due, honestly. I think it was time kind of to move on from some of the older players and kind of in with the new. So for the most part, yeah, I'm happy with how the market turned out. There was a lot of kind of ups and downs, but in the end, I think we filled the holes we kind of needed, and we did well for what it was.
Which signing are you most excited about, and which signing do you think is the most questionable?
Definitely the most I'm excited for has got to be Marcus Thuram or Davide Fratesi. Thuram was one of the ones as soon as the Lukaku, all this, honestly, from the beginning, I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I didn't want to renew his loan. I thought it was time to move on. Him in particular, his wages were high. He was injured for a lot of last season, so yeah, I thought it was time to move on. And as soon as it was confirmed, he was all that nonsense with Juve or whatever it was, I was like, okay, Marcus Thuram, free agent, French national team, we need to get this guy. So I was really happy when it was between us and Milan, and we ended up signing him. It was huge. I think this is perfect. He's perfect for us, and he's been really good the first 3 games of the season. I think he can be a real asset. And then Fratesi, yeah, Italian national team midfielder. He's been really good at Sassuolo the past few years. I thought he would get a move before, and then the style of deal we did too, the loan with obligate, it's perfect. It's just classic. So yeah,
both great signings, and obviously in the game, was it yesterday, 2 days ago now, Thuram looked fantastic, a goal, an assist, won a penalty, and I just personally think the link-up play is so much better with him. He feels more natural on the ball, not as clumsy as Lukaku. He lets the team get out and run, and that counter where he passed the ball through the entire defense to set up Lautaro's in the second goal of the match was just beautiful.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what was your most questionable signing of the summer? What are you most skeptical about?
I mean, I think it has to be Davy Klaassen. I mean, I understand the need, maybe the need for a 7th, 8th midfielder, but I don't know. I think there could have been better options. I know we were linked to Ndombele. Maxime Lopez and Klaassen. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he'll come good. I mean, I'm sure the club knows what they're doing, and he wouldn't just sign for no reason. But I don't know. 30 years old. I guess it's fine if he's just a every so often rotational player. He's just kind of there to fill the gap. But for me, that's the questionable. I think the rest were pretty good. Just looking through our squad. I don't know. Maybe no. I think that's it.
Did you want a different style of midfielder instead of Klaassen, do you think? Or is it more of just the fact we signed a bit of an aging player who hasn't been at his best in a couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's the latter there. I saw reports we were either going for a kind of a playmaker or a physical midfielder. And I don't know if he really fits either. I don't know. I get the need for another body. Sensi, obviously he's injured quite often, and so I can see the need for it, so I can understand it. It's just I don't know if Yush would have been my top choice.
That makes sense. For me personally, it's Arnautovic. You're way too young to remember his first stint at the club, I'd imagine. It was interesting. He was
that long year.
Yeah, I think he played 3 matches for us, and Mourinho called him a petulant child, something along those lines.
Yeah, I've read reports or stuff like that, or just seen old quotes or whatever.
Yeah, we were joke around that. Just imagine telling an Inter fan 4 years ago that Juan Cuadrado, Arnautovic, and Çalhanoğlu would be the core players on an Inter team.
Oh my gosh. I tweeted a picture of that yesterday after the game when the three of them were like dancing after Hakan scored his pen. It's like, if you show the picture to someone like 5 years ago, I don't even know what they would say. It's like, who would have thought Cuadrado, Arnautovic, Hakan, and Çalhanoğlu playing for the Inter? Like,
even Conte managing the team. It's just
exactly, yeah.
It's been a wild ride, but it feels like we're in the most stable spot we've been as a club for a long time. Hopefully, this Suning drama with their loan due to Oak Tree doesn't ruin the stability.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about Suning. Like, I've been over it for like 3-4 years now at this point. I don't know.
Yeah, you and everyone else, my friends.
Yeah.
So last thing I want to get your thoughts on is we're in the middle of an international break, but we all know what lies ahead. Big derby coming up against Milan. Give me your early preview on it. How do you feeling going into it? The two best teams in the league, the two most informed teams, and I'll even take a prediction if you're brave enough to make one.
Oh, jeez. I'm like sneaky optimistic. Yeah, I think I saw something earlier. This will be like our 5th win against them in 2023 in the calendar year. So, I mean, realistically, most Inter fans should be pretty optimistic. Although, it's a derby, anything can happen. They're top of the league just as we are. And I think this is the first time ever that there'll be a derby where we're both tied for first. I think it's always ever been one or the other, or in different places. So we're tied for first, which makes it the incentive even like bigger. I don't know. They've been I haven't watched a ton of their games, but they've been getting a lot of pens, man. Like
4 through 4
is, man. So I don't know if I can judge them. I don't know if it's too early yet, but I think Inter, I think our squad is deeper than theirs personally. And I think we just have that extra bit of quality. We've been playing with some serious confidence, coming off a big win. I'm hoping we can get a win. I think we will get a win. I don't know the score, but I think we'll win.
I like the optimism. Good reason for it after that demolition of Fiorentina. No doubt Milan have looked good this season, and of course, biased, but Pulisic, fantastic form. We'll see. It's Inzaghi has had Pioli's number in the past 12 months or so. So you'd like to think that we're well positioned to win this game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate the time today, man. It's been great finding out more about Inter Xtra. Like I said at the top, you're doing a fantastic job running this account. We hope you keep it running. Hopefully not every summer is as busy as this summer for you, but it's great content. And I know everyone on the forum and just in the Inter community appreciates what you do.
Thank you. Thanks. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Hopefully I'll keep it going for a long time.
All right. Thanks, man. Forza Inter.
Forza Inter.
And that's our interview with Thomas from Inter Xtra. I hope you enjoyed our first ever guest interview in the history of Interjections.
Okay, let's transition to breaking down the Mercato. There is a ton. I was making a list before the episode of all the rumors, comings and goings for the summer, and it's unbelievable to think about how much has changed. Well, our starting 11 is still mostly intact from last season. So we're going to do this in chronological order. I'm going to start basically at July 1st. We can talk about everything that's transpired, maybe pick apart what we liked, what we didn't like, and at the end, I'll ask you all for your Mercato grades. So the first big decision of the summer was choosing to let D'Ambrosio, Handanovic, Dzeko, and Gagliardini leave. Their contracts expired. We elected not to renew any of them. Jay, were any mistakes made there? Or are you happy with all 4 of those decisions?
I think Handanovic could have stayed, to be honest. Those guys left on freeze, as did Skriniar. And then, of course, Brozovic left. So essentially, we lost a lot of combined years experience with those guys. So I wasn't sad to see D'Ambrosio or obviously Gagliardini leave. It seemed like Dzeko, if you take Morata at face value, it seemed like they would have kept him had they known we wouldn't sign Lukaku. But I think it turned out for the best that we didn't keep Dzeko, to be honest. We'll get to his replacement and stuff like that. But no, I wasn't upset with losing too many of them, but I think there's a debate to be had between Adero versus renewing Handanovic for another season.
I do think there's value. We all love Handanovic, And Aldero's not a great keeper, but I think just having a formal passing of the captaincy to Lautaro is valuable. It's not signaling the start of a new era, but having the formal transition, I do think there's value there. And maybe that's one of the reasons you let Handanovic go when, he was probably not going to play a role in the squad anyway.
That's a good point. Yeah. I haven't even thought about that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think my main concern, I think the main reason I was happy overall with the way things started, getting rid of these players, is because I feel like in some sense we have to save Inzaghi from himself. And he just has these tendencies to really want to play the experienced hand. Even the amount of times we saw D'Ambrosio last year was too much, in my opinion. Like, it's great to have these guys on the bench for their kind of locker room presence and their leadership, but as long as D'Ambrosio and Gagliardini were going to be an option, it was just too tempting for Inzaghi, I think. And so getting rid of them, I think, was a good move. Same thing with Dzeko. Like, his time had come, I think. And obviously, I do think there's a reason that maybe Handanovic could have stayed. But I think what's interesting is, we're doing this chronologically, and I think it makes a lot of sense. But it's funny if you were to like just pause at any moment of time, getting rid of those players at the start of the window was probably so great because we finally were able to get rid of some of these players that have been thorns in our side for a while. But not knowing what was going to happen with their replacements going forward, I think probably created a lot of anxiety. And what ended up transpiring, I think, made these departures look a lot better by the end of the transfer window than they were probably, halfway or even towards the end of the transfer window before we closed down everything.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just remember, another example, in live time, at the start of the window, there was no scenario where I wanted Lukaku back. I did not want to buy him outright. I did not want to loan him. But then when he does his flirtation with Juve and he leaves, you're looking around and we're being linked to Arnautovic as our striking replacement. I'm like, wait a second. Was I wrong the first time? Was Lukaku the right answer?
Yeah.
But as we'll talk about, I think it all worked out for the best in the end. So the next kind of chronological order piece after those players' contracts expired, we were linked to a couple of defenders from La Liga. Nacho and Azpilicueta were both reported to be considering. Nacho had a contract offer from us. Azpilicueta, the way Romano phrased it, it seemed like he was very close to joining. Like, the medical was booked almost until he received an offer from Atletico, and clearly his heart was to go back to Spain. So we ended up signing neither center back, which maybe set the tone for the way we ended up allocating our funds to Pavard later in the Mercato. I guess, Miko, were you up, since you love old, washed up football players?
Yes.
Were you upset at all that we didn't get Nacho or Azpilicueta?
Yeah, well, yeah. At the time when that all happened, I was a bit disappointed we didn't get him. But afterwards, well, of course, I believe that if we would have signed him, we wouldn't have seen Pavard getting or us getting Pavard. So I'm not too sad about that. But at the point or at the time of those events, it didn't I wasn't happy about how he ended up at Atletico, because I would have guessed he would have been a good addition. No worries at this point anymore. Like the money we had available, it would have gone differently in the striker department maybe at that point.
It is interesting to see like how like the strategy was very fluid this summer, because you're exactly right. Like, we were going for like a free, slightly older defender while spending big money on a striker, when in reality we kind of switched up the plan, right? We signed a cheaper old striker and splurged on a prime age defender.
I would guess that most of the time the Mercato plans are a bit fluid, but maybe this summer was like a bit extreme, at least for even for Inter. Because
I think that's a good way of putting it.
The first big signing of the summer, I think, caught a lot of people off guard, and that's Thuram. he picked Inter over Milan. He had almost identical offers from both clubs. I think Milan's contract was structured. It would have had more like performance bonuses, whereas we offered a little bit higher guaranteed salary. But the links to Thuram had kind of died down. As you may remember, we were first linked to him after Lukaku left, and then he suffered that horrible injury. A bit of a surprise signing. Jay, as our resident Milan experts, we talked about Thuram a bit already this episode, but do you feel like we got one over on Milan by getting a player like Thuram on a free?
At the moment, it looks that way. Milan themselves still don't have. I mean, I guess they got Jovic, but they didn't have a good replacement for Giroud. I guess they would have had a similar conversation that we did earlier about Thuram's capability as a straight number 9, but I wasn't hugely thrilled because, again, Thuram is earning 6 million euros, which is not insignificant. Had Thuram been signed for a fair market value, you would expect that salary to be in the 3 to 4.5 range, I dare say. If you take salary as a reflection of the player's ability, then I don't think it's a stretch to say he's getting paid more than, I know this sounds very harsh, but more than he had earned at that point. But as we know, ultimately, it's not about that. It's about how much it costs us, on the books and all that kind of thing. So, look, good signing. But at the time, I guess I was a bit hesitant considering the fact that, we offered him a lot of money.
Yeah, see, I think in the context for me, the thing that was apparent at the time when I tried to transport myself back into that time period, here we had just gotten rid of Dzeko, we had Lautaro, and we had nothing else. Lukaku was heavily, linked that eventually there would be some kind of a deal. But really the forward situation was in shambles at the point. And if we would have lost him to Milan, given what else we were being linked to or looking at, I didn't have much faith in the ability to kind of close out that forward department if we weren't going to sign him. But I think a lot of people, in addition to the money that you were talking about, Jay, I think a lot of people had a lot of concerns about his ability to play any type of cohesive forward role that wasn't, some hybrid winger role. So it was definitely a bit of a mystery as to what we were getting. But at the time, I remember just being happy that we ended up getting somebody who wasn't, 36, 38 years old, who could actually help our ranks.
Yeah, and I'm trying to view this from this perspective of how did I feel at the time, as opposed to how do I feel now when the Mercato's done, and we've seen 3 games. You're right in saying at the time it looked like Lukaku would stay, so it looked like Thuram would be somewhat of a first backup to either Lukaku and Lautaro. So that I'm thinking there 6 million for like a backup is pretty expensive, but I did appreciate the profile. I did appreciate the age as well, but definitely at the time a little bit more reserved. But one of the things we mentioned earlier was that now that it was clear Lukaku's not coming, and Arnautovic and Sanchez are our players, Thuram is the undisputed number 1. So it ended up the finances ended up kind of justifying themselves. You know what I mean? Not that they were ever planned to, but it just ended up becoming that way. So,
And actually, at that point, when we kind of realized that Thuram will be the number 1 or the starting player, then it became a bit more worrying, at least for me, that is this guy gonna be the starter now? He should be scoring some goals. So I kind of agree with you guys that it wasn't at the time of signing. It wasn't like I wasn't too thrilled. Of course, I was happy that we signed him in front of Milan, but then, like Jay said, that it wasn't something.
It wasn't enough, It wasn't enough. We needed more.
Yeah, but then after Lukaku, it was like I was worried about how effective he can be then, even if the money is right at that point. But then the player itself is good enough. But good that there's no worry about that at least for now.
Andrew mentioned something the other week, which is really ringing true to me. He noticed us play in a way which more resembled a 3-5-1-1 with Thuram. So that's kind of inadvertently taken some pressure off him as a number 9, you know? So we've got a system where it's almost like we don't have a backup for Lautaro, and instead we have 3 supporting players behind him. Obviously, the first choice is Thuram, and then we've got Sanchez and Arnautovic, and then Arnautovic can occasionally play in Lautaro's place. But if you get what I'm saying, the tip of the spear remains Lautaro, and just what backs him up is a little bit different. And so I guess at the time we didn't realize this, you know what I mean? We thought it would be a much more consistent 3-5-2 in the way that we'd seen from Inzaghi and Conte for the previous few years. I don't think any of us were expecting to see much of a shift to the 3-5-1-1 where the service is all about funneling goals to Lautaro. And in hindsight, I think that definitely kind of justifies the Thuram transfer a lot more now.
It's also just more aesthetically pleasing football to watch as opposed to having 2 just brooding dinosaurs parked in the box with little ability to like break open a defense. It's a pretty watch.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, like I said, at the time we didn't know. We thought Thuram would just be Lautaro's designated strike partner, but thankfully Inzaghi's, and to his credit, he's found a way to not have that. And so I think that's for the better.
So after Thuram signed, the Frattesi links picked up, and the deal was close. We had reached agreement in principle with Sassuolo, but it was contingent on Brozovic being sold to Saudi Arabia. And for me, this is the lowlight of the Mercato, where we had an agreement around 30 million. It was like 25 plus bonuses, something like that, to sell Brozovic to Saudi Arabia. And I was okay with that fee because he's over 30. He's not necessarily a name. I was okay with that. But then, like every club who buys from Inter, the Saudis smell blood, they play hardball, and they come in with a significantly lower offer. And I don't doubt that selling Brozovic was an okay decision. I'm fine with it currently, but the fee is just insulting. And when you look at some of the fees that these Saudi and Qatari clubs have splashed out on other lesser players this Mercato, it's just disheartening. Verratti went for 40 million today, like kind of a post-transfer window deal to a Qatari club. There was maybe you guys can help me remember. There was another player the Saudi league just signed. It was just an insulting fee for a mediocre player, which I suppose was most of their transfers this summer. But
Diego Jota or something.
Yeah.
Ruben Neves or something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the low light of the transfer window to me. We lost one of our best players for our pittance, but we did replace him with Frattesi, who I think we've established was the most expensive signing by a Serie A club this summer. Irfan, how do you feel about the Brozovic Frattesi kind of swap almost?
Yeah, so this was like you mentioned, a very interesting time period during the window. So there's a lot of different feelings among Inter fans about Brozovic. I think there's some who legitimately consider him to be absolutely world class, one of the best at his position. There's others who kind of say he has a bit of a lack of intensity, maybe like a lack of good leadership skills, attitude on the pitch, which, results in kind of a more lackadaisical approach from the team. There's others who think that he's, one of the best at setting up and keeping the team running and just doing a lot of the dirty work, which I think is very true when you look at some of his statistics. And so, I think if you ask Inter fans, you'll see a lot of varying degrees of devotion to Brozovic and his tenure. I think the one thing that can't be denied is that for many, many years, if Brozovic was not on the pitch, it was an automatic loss for Inter, or a draw. And it was so palpable that when he was suspended or when he was injured, you just went into the game nervous about what was going to happen. And so the fact that he became even somewhat expendable, I think, was refreshing because Hakan carried that role so well last year. And so making him even somewhat expendable, I think, was a win for the club. But like you said, the inability to get even essentially 20 million for someone like him who does not have an injury riddled history. He's not used or deployed or functions in a way that makes him prone to injury or makes him prone to heavy wear and tear. Like you can expect him to continue doing what he's doing for easily another 4 or 5 years without skipping a beat, at a very high level. And so the inability for them for the team to get even 20 million from him was shocking. And then the fact that you look at like the other transfers that the Middle Eastern clubs have been doing, it just seemed like a negotiating loss. I know most fans were very excited about Fratesi. I was too, but I couldn't help during this time of the transfer window to just be really concerned that given the lack of resources that we had to spend and the holes that we had on the team, I just didn't understand why we were devoting so much energy and resources to midfield in general. Like even if you had to keep Brozovic for another year, the midfield would have still been in decent shape. And so spending that much money on Fratesi without getting that much money on Brozovic, given all the other holes in the team, I think at the time left me a little nervous.
Agreed. There's a number of considerations here. Brozovic is only 30, so it's not even like his early 30s, 32, whatever. He's just like a flat even 30, or at least was at the time. And as Irfan mentioned, he's a player that a lot of Inter fans will differ over how much they rate him, but I think everyone would at least unanimously agree that he's one of the best in the league in that role. And he also had 3 years left on his contract, and so you generally don't let players go that cheaply when they have that many years left on their contract. On top of that, there was that whole, what can you even call it other than an insult, which was the reneged transfer offer from Al Nassr. You know what I mean? This is not a club that lacks any money, but we agreed on 23 million, which in itself is far too low for my liking. But then they come back and say, oh, actually, how about 17? That they broke that promise. That's pretty shitty business. And yet we were still willing to accept it. Like I said, it felt like an insult. And the whole Fratesi thing, everyone knew from the offset that Fratesi was not Brozovic's replacement, at least not functionally on the pitch. The replacement was always going to be Çalhanoğlu, and Fratesi was just going to come in to potentially replace Mkhitaryan. But even going back then, without having seen the first 3 games and all this kind of stuff, I think a lot of us knew that Mkhitaryan was extremely important to the way we played, and so there was not even any guarantee that Fratesi would effectively bench Mkhitaryan, So when you put all these considerations together, it is a very grey move. It's very, very hard for me to sit here and say, was it the right thing to do to ship Brozovic and bring in Fratesi? Fratesi has played like an hour in total since then. Brozovic has been dominating the Saudi league, which I'd expect for a player of his caliber. And my biggest issue is that what Irfan said is 100% correct, that we were so Brozovic reliant, and we've kind of, rid ourselves of that reliance on him. But have we not just shifted that reliance onto Çalhanoğlu? Çalhanoğlu is the same age as Brozovic. He gets paid the same amount. Like, there's no difference. If you put it that way, there's almost like no difference between the two players in a way. If anything, Brozovic has many more years of experience playing in that role and of proven performance. Last year was Çalhanoğlu's first time in his career playing as a defensive mid. This is a guy, let's not forget, he started his career as like a second striker, he's like a winger, AM/second striker kind of forward, and now he's playing DM. So don't get me wrong, he's been absolutely brilliant. The start of the season, probably our best player across the 3 games, alongside Lautaro. But yeah, I feel like we've just kind of shifted that reliance, that enormous reliance, from Brozovic onto Hakan. What happens if Hakan is injured, or what happens if Hakan is suspended? is not going to be the same case that we have with Brozovic.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I agree with all of you that that sale didn't go too well for Inter, and I strongly feel that there's something behind the move, which is not purely like a financial or like football related, and it's more about some club versus player stuff that the club didn't appreciate or something.
Yeah.
Some stuff going on behind the scenes after the World Cup and maybe before the World Cup. I don't remember how was it. Brozovic got injured and then he was immediately ready for the World Cup and stuff like that. And was it that he wasn't ready after the World Cup? And maybe something fishy was there. I don't know. But yeah, the sale was bad, and I think if I remember correctly, was it that when we first agreed with the fee, was it the 23 plus bonuses or 23 flat fee, something like that? And then there was the issue with Brozovic not wanting to go to Saudi League.
Yeah.
And then when they finally agreed the salary, it was like over 30 million per year net. So maybe Saudis wanted to they wanted to save a bit of money, and as Andrew mentioned, they smelled blood and saw that okay, these guys just want to sell the guy, and let's lower the fee a bit.
You might remember the sensational reports during the saga where I forget who the source was on this, that Brozovic wanted to be released for free. He wanted his contract terminated so the Saudis would give him an even larger salary.
Yeah, or he wanted a golden handshake or something.
And just classic Brozovic fashion.
Yeah.
So the next domino to fall in the Mercato was we finally sold Onana to United. He was pushed out the door, perhaps slightly willing, but we told him he was being sold this summer. We negotiated. He essentially became, I think, the second most expensive keeper transfer ever. And then a funny thing happened, which was we did not have a first, second, or third string keeper in the squad. We were basically playing with a youth academy player in our Japanese preseason. So we shipped out Onana for a hefty fee, and we're desperately searching and unable to find a keeper for a solid 2 weeks.
During which we went undefeated against PSG and I think, okay, let's say firstly, how do we feel about the money involved in the Onana transfer? Are we all happy with it, or I personally find that a lot of Inter's transfers, like, it's hard to deny that we get good money. Am I being too nitpicky or too greedy to be a little bit regretful that we didn't get great money? You know, like I definitely feel there was another.
Yes.
I definitely feel there was another, at least 5 to 10, maybe even 15 million we could have squeezed out there, considering how much, again, not just these Saudi guys that Andrew mentioned, but it really isn't just the Saudis, it's the English as well. These guys are spending obscene amounts of money on, thoroughly mediocre players. And I know there's like an English Premier League premium and all this kind of stuff, but even considering those factors, I just feel we could have squeezed out another 10-15% on what we got for him.
The thing that is just the overarching theme of our transfers is when we're pushing players out the door, these clubs buying from us realize that, and they know they can lowball us. And frankly, was anyone else interested in Onana? It was
Chelsea.
It seems like
Chelsea.
It seems like United was the only legitimate negotiation that took place. And as a result, like, we got a good fee for him, but if we weren't openly, like, we put him in a display window case and said, put a sale sign up and said, buy now, receive 10% off, as opposed to the way smaller clubs tend to negotiate with, like, Inter, which is we don't need to sell our player. We're not going to sell our player. And that's why in my lifetime, the only sale I feel like we can really hang our hat on, say, that was great business, were the Lukaku sale and the Icardi sale. And the Icardi sale after we already tanked his value by a good, 30 million.
You say Ibrahimovic to that list as well.
Yeah, good point.
I think the biggest thing here is that, most of the time when you want to buy something, you go to the store, you go to the seller and you ask them for the good that you want to purchase. Here, Inter is operating essentially what is a door-to-door sales strategy, and straight off the bat, it puts us in a position of weakness. The only person who opened their door and was willing to have a chat with us was Man United and a little bit of Chelsea, but I feel like our strategy is to, hey guys, do you want to buy this? Because we want to sell it to you. We really want to sell this to you more so than, I mean, I guess it's obvious if you think about it, but generally that's not the messaging when you go into like a store to buy, I don't know, clothing or food or whatever it is, you know what I mean? The business and the price is all implied. It's not them coming to you with an offer. So I think our negotiating strategy, which is of course somewhat forced upon us by the ownership, is, what can I say? It's never going to be ideal. It's not going to yield the best results either. So I do accept that we're in a tough place. But I guess, like I said, there is still a part of me that is a little bit regretful we didn't get another 5-10 million for him.
Well, here's the thing. I think one of the things that you all are mentioning makes a lot of sense, in that the way we conduct our business on the sales side is pretty pathetic. And I think part of the problem is that we're never negotiating from a position of power, mainly because everyone knows how transparent our financial difficulties are. It's like reported, immediately and consistently, even during the Champions League final, about how, we got to the Champions League final, but this team is in financial, dire straits. And so everyone who's ever dealing with us knows that, we can't bluff our way into a position of strength because we're not in one. And so that creates a lot of tension for us. And then, look at the way Bayern treated us when it came to Pavard, who was basically consistently saying he's not going to re-sign a contract. He was on an expiring contract. And yet they kept saying all the way till like the last day that, no, he's an important player for us. We're not going to sell him. Well, we got to find a replacement. They just kept pushing things along. And, you can't even really question that because, well, okay, it's Bayern. Like, they'll take the loss. If they don't need to sell this guy, then they'll take the loss. We totally believe it. So you can't bluff unless you actually have a position of strength and you're, saying something that's believable to the market. And whatever we say is never believable. But the reason it didn't bother me too much about how much we got for Onana was because, when you look at the market for goalkeepers, like we said, I think he's the third most expensive, which, when you look at some of the other names that are ahead of him, given their age and the hype around them at the time, you kind of understand that he wasn't probably going to go for the same amount that Alisson went. And the other thing was, you can't forget that people know how much you paid for somebody. And so I know it's unfair, but like the fact that we got him on a free, it depressed his market value a little bit. Like he wasn't going to end up being sold for 75 million or even 65 million after someone got him on a free just a year ago. So I think that given all that sort of stuff, it didn't bother me too much. But again, it just left a sore taste in, I think, everyone's mouth that every time we're in any sort of negotiation for anything, we just come across as like the subservient beta team.
Yeah, it always feels like you can reliably just joke about, whatever the price that we want to sell a player at, in 1 week it's going to drop to 5 million. It's going to drop by 5 million, and then the next week it's going to drop by 5 million, and then whatever the rumored offer is and whatever our rumored demands are, it's always going to be much closer to the offer than to our demand. You know what I mean? We're not going to, and that's the frustrating thing, that we are willing to travel to the buyer and meet them closer at their offer rather than even the bare minimum or the what you'd expect to be the kind of middle ground of, let's meet in the middle. If it's like 60 and 40, if we're asking 60 and they're offering 40, it's not, let's just meet in the middle of 50. It's like, okay, we'll come to you at 42, 43, you know what I mean? Just because we need that 42, So that's always really, as you said, it leaves a sour taste in the mouth, just like you said.
But we actually got more than that 50. If we asked like 60 and they started from 40 or something, and we got 52 and a half plus easy bonuses, 5 million.
I wasn't saying that. I wasn't saying the 60-40 in relation to a 9. I just meant in general. But
yeah, but I think it was pretty close in this case. I don't know. Did we even ask more than 60? I think it was
maybe
pretty fair. But as you guys mentioned, there wasn't a lot of like competition. Chelsea was mentioned like first, but then they ended up signing this. What was the name? Robert Sanchez.
Yeah,
and he cost like less than 30 million, 25 or something.
Yeah.
So maybe it was just that there wasn't market for Onana for 60 million or even for 60 million. So, but yeah, I agree that our position in these negotiations is pretty poor usually.
Okay, so after Onana is sold, the prevailing thought is now we can go and close for Lukaku. We have an agreement in place in principle with Chelsea for around 35 million. We're good. We're gonna get our guy. And then everyone knows what happens. He flirts with Juventus. He doesn't answer calls from management. He doesn't answer calls from Lautaro. And we move on from Lukaku. And I don't think we need to deep dive into Lukaku too much. But the names we're immediately linked to after him are Morata and Balogun. Morata with a apparent 20 million release clause with Atletico. Balogun, who Arsenal are demanding obscene amounts of money for, in excess of 50 million after a good season in France. Of course, we did not end up signing either of them. Irfan, as the Morata stan of the podcast, are you okay with how this worked out?
Yeah, I think it worked out okay. This is around the same time where, we start panicking and everyone's wondering what direction the club's going to go in. And there's, then all of a sudden the opportunity cost and, lack of resources become a huge issue. And this is where I think, we end up saying, some very smart individuals among us end up saying, hey, I'll take an Arnautovic if I can get a Pavard and things like that. And so we start to we start to really worry about, where we're going to invest whatever limited resources we have, especially when Lukaku gets off the table. But, given the way he behaved and just, it turns out he's just such a miserable character that, ultimately I think we dodged a bullet that he didn't end up coming. And I know, you and among others didn't want him from the very beginning. But this is like, where I think alarm bells start ringing for everyone. The names that we're being linked to, even after Morata, like, Taremi and stuff, nothing's like really inspiring a lot of confidence among the fans. And then, so I think ultimately it worked out really well, but I remember at this time being very, very nervous and, looking around at what we were being linked with. I was obviously more comfortable with someone like Morata than I was with someone like Balogun, mainly because I didn't believe for 1 second we were going to spend anything over 40 million on a striker. I just didn't believe it, and I still don't believe that we ever were. And so, I think among the names, we started to make some jokes about Arnautovic, but it turned out it was Arnautovic. But given everything else that ended up happening, I think it was an okay move.
Of course, Balogun ends up going for, I believe, 40 million to Monaco with a large percentage resale fee for Arsenal kicked in. I got a great joy over the weekend, or maybe just sadness, in reading that Pepe, who Arsenal signed for around 75 million euros in 2019 from Lille, they had to give him a golden handshake over the weekend with 1 year remaining on his contract. And it's insane to think about, like, how that would ruin Inter financially. And yet for Arsenal, who are a completely mediocre club, who are never going to win a Premier League title, who are never going to win a Champions League title, this is, just a rounding error. It's not going to impact their day-to-day operations. They don't have to go sell one of their jewels now as a result of this colossal mistake.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about the striker situation? I feel like I'm in the minority here, but I'm just not all that thrilled with the bench. I just don't like having a 35 and a 34-year-old as the two quote-unquote game-changing options off the bench. Arnautovic had a great debut, but I know it's only been 3 games, but in the following 2 games, he didn't do anything. I think that's, and I said it at the time, he's not going to have that kind of impact that he had against, who do we start against? Bologna?
Monza,
that's it, yeah. I said at the time, he's not going to, just come off the bench and have like that kind of game-winning or game-changing performance that he did against Monza every time. And even in the following 2 side appearances, I felt like he barely touched the ball. He couldn't keep it. He couldn't control it. He couldn't, hold up the ball. I don't know. Personally, I'm just not very comfortable with having those 2. And Sanchez in particular, like even now, there's already rumors that, there's some bullshit going on about his,
rare blood condition.
Yeah, fitness and national team duties and all that kind of stuff, which is very unwelcome, or a very unwelcome way to start your inter career part 2. I just feel like other clubs may just be able to bring an injection of pace off the bench, and everyone knows, like we alluded to with the Quadrado example. So if you bring a player with pace off the bench against a tight defense, that's like a tried and tested way of having an impact. Arnautovic and Sanchez, it has to be purely skill based, which is a much harder thing to achieve than just simply beating a tired defender down the flank. You know what I mean? It's less reliable.
No one wants to hear this, but the part that worries me is next summer you're going to have to sign a striker, and strikers aren't cheap, and that means given our 0 budgets, money is going to have to be raised from somewhere. So unless you can find a guy on a free, I'm just afraid we kick the can down the road this summer. And yeah, to your point, like this squad, there's not much striking depth right now, and if Thuram gets hurt, I don't feel comfortable with either of them stepping in as a starter. If Lautaro gets hurt, the season's effectively over. Seriously though, like the amount we are now reliant on Lautaro up front is akin to how much we rely on Hakan in the midfield. It's just we cannot afford any sort of injury for him. So after the Lukaku kind of fiasco, in the middle of the night, we pick up 3 signings. Odero comes, and now we have a keeper in the squad. Bisek signs from Denmark, and Quadrado arrives on a free transfer. And that answers a lot of questions about the depth on the team. Those are all just reserve players who you hope don't have to play a ton this season, but just rounding out all the holes in the squad from all the players who have departed. So I mentioned the next piece with a bit of sadness, and that's we had Scamacca in our sights and we let him go. I'm sure you all saw his 2 beautiful goals he scored last weekend for Atalanta, the first of many to come. I will just say that I think I am very happy Pavard is here, but I would be happier if Scamacca was here. And I only say that because having a young in his prime striker would result, we would not have, Alexis and Arnautovic as our reserve strikers, to Jay's point. So I understand why we did what we did, but I am sad about this.
Yeah, I know we'll get to this, I guess, at the end, rating of the Mercato, but I think a lot of people would agree the Pavard signing, really, really kind of saved this Mercato. Like, without the Pavard signing, the Mercato was trending towards like a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10 at best. But Pavard gave it an extra 2 points kind of by himself, and he hasn't even played a minute in our jersey yet. So, yeah, at the time, I was upset to miss out on Scamacca, especially for the rumoured difference of 2 million. And it sounded like, if the reports are to be believed, it sounded like we offered 24 plus 4 million. Atalanta offered 25 plus 5 to make it 30. West Ham came to us and said, do you want to match their offer? And it sounded like Scamacca was willing to prioritize us because, a deal had been agreed with the player. And we said, no. You know, so that was a pretty frustrating way to lose that deal. But everything is prefaced by the fact that we got Pavard in the end. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
At the time of that event of not signing Scamacca, it was really frustrating. The first reports was that he picked Atalanta over us, but that's I don't believe that at all. That sounds total BS. And indeed, if it was like because of 2 million, that's not smart, because to say it shortly.
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to what Andrew was saying, which is, there's two camps probably. One camp would take Pavard and Arnautovic, given the circumstances, and another camp would have preferred maybe Scamacca and Azpilicueta, right? Because you're devoting resources to different positions, different players. Ultimately, you're still kicking the can down the road. Obviously, the best situation would have been we keep Skriniar and then we just add Scamacca, right? And that's there. You don't even have a resource problem really. But given all that's transpired, given all of the failures and other happenings in our transfer window, I think it really came down to, is there better value investing in forward, or is there better value investing in that central back position? And I think for this Mercato, I think it was just kind of decided that maybe the central back position was the one worthy of investment. But honestly, if you were to even ask the board or even ask Morata, probably it went on and on, probably all the way towards the end, the debate as to where whatever that 30 million that we had should have been invested in forward or in central back.
Yeah, I don't think there was like any debate at that point that okay, we won't invest to Scamacca, so now we will invest to a defender. I think it was as said before, it was very fluid and like case by case, like what are our options, and okay, should we invest this money to this player and so on. So it's a bit hard to rate these single signings because there's so much dependencies between them.
Yeah, a lot of it, a lot of the individual transfers, as Miko said, are hard to rate because of the way the Mercato came together at the end, even with the Claessens signing, which, considering we didn't lose anyone to sign Claessens, has to be considered a bonus, you know what I mean? It's just an extra resource, even if we don't end up using it that much. But yeah, like we've mentioned several times, the fluidity of it. I've never seen such a Mercato like this where we just change, on a dime, player to player, position to position in terms of allocating resources.
So, and the one thing I agree on is that Scamacca is a riskier transfer than Pavard. Pavard's world class in his prime. You know exactly what you're getting.
Yeah,
whereas Scamacca, there's some injury. Yeah, Scamacca, there's some injury concerns. He had a down season at West Ham. I understand wanting to go with a safer option, but I'll just be clear. I don't think this was necessarily deliberate by management as much as it was we lucked into this. So I punished them a little bit for that.
Oh, I agree completely.
Yeah, 100%.
Let me run through a few of these quickly, just we can maybe speed along so we don't go too long on this episode. So Summer signs, we finally have a keeper. Arnautovic is signed, at which point it's clear that we're not going to invest heavily in a forward. Gosens is shipped out to Union Berlin in favor of Augusto arriving from Monza, and the Samardzic deal collapses. I think we've talked about all of those in previous episodes. I hear a snicker at the mention of Samardzic, so if anyone wants to opine on that one, feel free.
No, I'll stop myself. Thanks very much.
This was just a chaos. This was just a chaos part of the window where it just looked like we were, desperately trying to figure out what direction to go in. The stories just stopped making a lot of sense. The priorities just were way out of whack. And I just remember, if there was any time where everyone was completely losing heart as to what was going to happen, this was the time. And it was a very nerve-wracking, I think, time for everybody. And as we showcased on a few of the other podcasts, I think we all had very strong views on what was going on.
On Scamacca's, on Skamaka and Samazic's parents. At the time, I remember thinking, because they were both done seemingly, and then they both unraveled spectacularly. But at the time, I remember thinking, look, if we get Skamaka and Samazic and then just bring in like a Toloi or someone like that at defense, maybe Demiral at best case scenario, I remember thinking that's like a 8 out of 10 window if we, consider the departures a bit favorably. But then both of those failed, and I was like, at this point, thinking, wow, this is going to hell really fast. But thankfully, it worked out okay in the end.
Yeah, and I still don't understand what we were trying to accomplish in the midfield this Mercato when you look at Samardzik, who is a completely different kind of player than a Klaassen, who is a completely different kind of player than a defensive midfielder. So I'm still confused. We'll see how that unfolds. But if Samardzik not arriving is what unlocked, Pavard arriving, I think we're all okay with it.
Yeah.
So then Pavard arrives. We've talked about that at length. The only question I want to pose for you all to kind of round this out is Correa leaves to Marseille. Sanchez arrives on a free from Marseille. I don't know if you guys have been following this, like these Sanchez blood rumors, where apparently he has like low hemoglobin levels, and as a result, he is like concerns about his ability to play while he's like simultaneously trying to play for the Chilean national team. The question I want to pose for you guys is, are we actually any better off on this signing? Like, the only way this works out to me is if Marseille finish in the top 3 and they have to redeem Correa. But if Correa has to return here next year, I think you can kind of consider this a bad sequence of events, because are we sure Sanchez is going to offer anything better than what Correa offered us?
Come on. Of course he's going to offer more. Correa doesn't offer anything. I think, well, I don't know about this fitness thing. I read that he's had this like before, also this anemia. I don't know. I don't think it's a big issue. Hopefully I'm right.
Yeah, I think it's too early to tell. I mean, the one thing that I will say is, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not huge on this Sanchez re-signing, but I have trouble arguing against what Miko just said, which is that Correa is just useless. Like, on paper, you'd think, I mean, both guys have obviously incredibly frustrating injury histories, but at least Correa is younger. I can't even say he's less prone to breaking down. So that's kind of an indication of where this is going. But, on paper, Correa is younger. So there's that going for him. But other than that, like, it's honestly hard for me to sit here and say, but he's more reliable or he's less likely to get injured, because he's neither of those things. So we got rid of a liability, but we got another potential. I don't think the guy who replaced Correa is that reliable either, to be honest. So it's too early to tell. On a scale of, if Correa was like a 3 out of 10 in terms of reliability, it's too early to say what level Sanchez will be at, but I hope it's more than a 5 or 6.
Yeah, this was to me, this was ultimately a punt job on the forward position. It was like, we don't have the resources. It's very clear. Let's just figure out a way to survive for a year. What worries me is, given the situation of our finances, if Thuram does really well, he is a very likely candidate to be sold, just because of the amount of plus Valenza that he would bring by selling. And so that concerns me, because, going into next year, we're clearly going to need at least one forward, maybe 2. The position's always been a position that requires a premium. And so it's going to be interesting to see what we're able to do. All I'm saying is, if Sanchez gets injured, or if Sanchez is unable to play too much, if we end up getting someone like Caicedo again in January, I'm just going to lose it. I can't deal with this club not figuring out that we need the ability to put a competent forward in there. I still maintain that signing Caicedo that 1 year basically cost us the Scudetto, because it was so clear we needed forward help, and the best thing that they could do was end up getting that guy. And so it's just one of those things where there better be some kind of plan already in motion, whether it's January or whether it's early next year. in the transfer window, there better be some kind of plan to address the forward situation, because we are pretty remarkably thin on that. And as great as Lautaro has been so far, we still don't know if he's going to have one of his 1 or 2 month droughts.
Well,
so
look,
that's the
fun.
concern.
You're in luck. I just searched forwards expiring contracts in 2024, and we've got Mbappe. We've also got Gabriel Barbosa, and then we've got Alvaro Morata again. So
there you go.
We're just gonna, and then Taremi. So we're just gonna visit Morata and Taremi again.
there it is. Yep.
I'll take Taremi on a free. Oh my god!
But actually, I heard this, that as I mentioned this before, that we were looking for the 5th striker before the window closed, and
really?
Jovic was mentioned. Yeah, and Jovic was mentioned, but yeah, he ended up to Milan then.
If you're gonna say Papu Gomez, I was gonna hang up this call.
I have bad news for you.
I just don't want. I just saw a name that sent shivers down my spine, and it's Michy Batshuayi. So let's hope.
By shivers up your spine, you mean like a tingling sensation of happiness?
Yeah, like that warm, fulfilled kind of feeling.
But yeah, I have to mention Papu Gomez. He's been I heard his name, that we have been in contact with him. So
do we have any young strikers around that could, let's just say hypothetically, that Arnautovic and Sanchez both got injured because they're both still playing for their national teams for some reason. Do we even have like a Esposito type player at the club at the moment?
I don't think so.
No, because
Esposito, Satriano, they're both out on loan, right? So those are the bigger ones.
We learned the younger Esposito as well. So
yeah, P.O. Esposito, whatever his name is. I'm sure a young Primavera player will establish himself as the first choice striker in Kivu's system. Is Kivu still our Primavera coach? Anyway, hopefully maybe we can rely on him if we have to, but at this point in time, I can't even name who that might be, so let's hope
the highest valued player is some striker from Poland named Jan Zubarek.
Zubarek, yeah. I've heard the name.
Zubarek, yeah, sure.
Is that Iliev guy still around?
I think he went back to Bulgaria.
Yeah.
I guess. Or at least wanted to, yeah.
I was hoping.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I was hoping, if it came to it and we needed to dip into our Primavera, that there might be at least some guy of notable, repute within Primavera standards that we could rely on, but it doesn't even seem like that's the case. So this is where we dip into like the Jonathan Carew market again, I think.
The player who is a free agent next summer, who we're 100% signing, just lock me in now, is Merit from Napoli.
You reckon?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Like, welcome to our keeper next season. No doubt in my mind.
Interesting.
What? Is he free agent next summer?
According to Transfermarkt, his contract expires next summer.
You don't think they'll renew him?
I would assume if he's not renewed at this point, much like Zelensky, it's going to be when you get to January, you still don't have a player re-signed, that Inter can put a higher wage contract in front of him than Napoli.
Usually Napoli does it that if the player doesn't have the extension ready, he won't even play at this point anymore. I remember that Milik was the case with Milik, yeah, and then they sold him to Marseille in January for pretty cheap.
Anyway, we can preview the 2024 Mercato in another episode.
I was just gonna say, we're gonna get Lukaku next summer, right?
All right. Well, let's hand out some numerical grades on a scale of 1 to 10. Miko, tell us why this is a 10 out of 10 Mercato.
I'm gonna give it to 8. 8 is it's good enough, but it wasn't like even close to perfect. But yeah, 8 is gonna give us to Scudetto.
Oof.
Irfan?
Yeah, I'm going 8 as well. I'm trying not to let the first 3 matches cloud my judgment too much because I'm probably irrationally exuberant at this point. So I was tempted to give it more than an 8, but for me, it always came down to Pavard. I've been consistent pretty much for the last couple of months on this. So the fact that we were able to land him, I think gives us a solid 8. And especially given what we cleared out, just getting rid of Gagliardini in and of itself, I think started with a 7. So with Pavard, it's up to an
8. Jay?
There's a lot of, in sales, how they're like, instead of saying this item costs $100, they'll say it costs $99.99. You know what I mean? And that makes a lot of difference to your perception, or allegedly. So I'm going to give this between a 6.9 and a 7.1. And, depending on how negative you feel, you can go down to the 6.9 because of that 6. Or if you want to feel a bit more positive, you can go up to that 7.1. And that 7 will make you feel better. But I don't know, like, how do you rate a Mercato? I guess, objectively, you just kind of weigh in the players in versus players out and how much they cost. But I do think everyone kind of gets influenced by this arbitrary feeling, how good you feel at the end of it. For me, the feeling is good. And so I'm inclined to rate it higher. But then, as I mentioned throughout the course of this episode, there were numerous things that I'm not quite happy with. One of them being the forward situation. One of them being selling Brozovic for 17 million. And we haven't even said his name yet. I want to hear you guys say his name, but we lost Skriniar for free. That was a really big blow, in my opinion, even if Darmian performed heroics to make that right centre-back position his own. But losing Skriniar for free and losing Brozovic for 17 million are pretty damning, to be completely honest. And those things are only kind of glossed over positively because of the fact that we managed to get Pavard and stuff. But let's say we hadn't, I think a lot more people would be more upset about those departures than they currently are. So again, that's that feeling at the end of the Mercato kind of, having more influence over the objective score than it should. But yeah, so I'll give it between a 6.9 and a 7.1. How about you, Andrew?
Yeah, I was going to give it a solid 7. There were a lot of things that happened this Mercato that I'm not thrilled about, particularly the direction we chose to go at keeper, the reserve strikers we brought in. Pavard saved this Mercato. I would have a lot fewer things to say had we not signed him.
Yeah.
But because we got such a good player at a reasonable fee, I'm able to forgive some of the sins of the past. But to your point, we've had 3 awesome first matches, and the fact we're 3-0, top of the table, everything feels great. It's hard to be optimistic about the Mercato after watching a fantastic start to the season. And if we beat Milan, then 10 out of 10 Mercato. You know what I mean? It's
Exactly.
So I think that concludes our Mercato wrap-up. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and please look forward to our Milan Derby podcast preview later this week.